Hello everybody and welcome to Practical Python for Houdini. My name is Corbin Main, lead effects artist and TD at Access Studios, and I will be your guide and instructor on this course. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to introduce you to the first module because each one, there's 3 modules and each one of them has a different sort of structure and main focus. And to get the most out of the course, you really need to sort of understand this and use the modules in the right way. So the first module is going to primarily focus on syntax and language. Basically, I need to make sure that you understand Python itself before we move into how to use it within Houdini. So module 1 is just going to be talking about Python itself, right? So we're going to start with the very, very basics, which means this module is focused towards people that have never used Python before, maybe have never coded before, or possibly have done Python before but long ago and have forgotten everything or didn't really understand it when they first did it. And essentially the goal of this module is to get everybody to the same level. So don't worry if you're an absolute beginner, but also if you have done Python before, just persist through this. I guarantee you there are things that you'll pick up that you didn't know before. Maybe you assumed you understood it, but you might pick things up. And really at the end of this module is going to be a kind of a reference for you. You will want to refer back to this module whenever you're confused or stuck. Maybe there's a certain part where I'm showing some coding and we just sort of skip past a certain function because, or maybe a certain syntax, the way that I, maybe slice an array or do something like that, and you're not really sure what I did. If I don't explain it in the class, it's because we've already covered it, so maybe you've missed it from this module. Then just come right back and, go through this module. For this module, I'm going to lay out all the classes in a very sort of very clear way where each lesson covers only one topic. So that's why there's going to be lots of smaller lessons so that you can easily refer back. It's very difficult to go through like a 3-hour long video searching for whatever you want. So I'm going to cut it up into very small manageable pieces, each with its own topic. That way you can refer back to it, find what information you need, and essentially use this as a handy guide, not only throughout this course, but in future as well. So, as I said, if you're new to Python, I would recommend that you repeat this module quite a few times. I personally, when I learned Python, it only really sank in when I started to go back and do the same course again and again. And every time I would get stuck and reach a point where I'm thinking, okay, I'm really not following everything that I'm being taught here, I would start from the very first lesson again, go right the way through. And even though it was boring at first, that's when it really sunk in. And that's when you start to understand the language. Because as soon as you can speak the language, understand it, write in it, as soon as you can ask the code, and the program what you want out of it, then Python really just comes down to, it's almost like a virtual assistant. You're just asking the program, hey, this is what I want. And it goes, okay, boss, and it gives you what you want. But you need to be able to speak its language. That's the only trick. And that's what we're going to cover in this module. Now, I just want to caution anyone who's newer out there, you may see some very large and overwhelming scripts here, and that's one of the main things that puts people off, is when they look at coding and they've never done it before, it just looks like a wall of text and it is scary and horrible. But it's the same as with a Houdini scene. Remember, if you first started Houdini, it's very overwhelming, especially if you dive inside of like the, like dot networks and things, like into those micro solvers. It's crazy. Like there's so many nodes in there and they're all wired together and it looks very scary. It's the same thing with code. It's just this crazy, scary thing that you don't understand. But we don't start there. You don't build a giant network. You build it one node at a time. And then you understand it from the inside out. And by the end, it all makes sense to you. I've even opened my own scenes that I maybe did a year ago and was overwhelmed by what I was looking at and couldn't quite get my head wrapped around it. But then if you just go node for node through it, you figure out what's happening, and then suddenly it all makes sense. It's exactly the same with code. So please do not be intimidated or overwhelmed when you see, because I might jump forward and show you something that we're going to do, like show you the final version of the script and then start building towards that. And I don't want anybody to be put off and think that they can't handle it. Because I guarantee you, we're going to do it one line at a time, and you will have total understanding of Python by the end of this. So that's for anyone who's newer. Now, anyone who has already done Python before, please do not skip this section. I know that there's maybe some things that you understand, but as I've mentioned before, repeating the basics is literally the best thing you can do for yourself, okay? You will always refer back to it, and a solid understanding is what's going to help you develop much more complicated things. So please, please, please focus, go through this, make sure that we're all at the same level by the end of this. Basically, all the beginners will be up to understanding how to use Python, and anyone who's used it before, this is going to fill in any gaps in your knowledge. All right, so let's jump straight into Houdini. Now, basically this course is for Houdini users, right? I've designed it to specifically be very practical and applicable to what you're trying to do on a daily basis, right? So rather than starting with external scripts, external editors, things like that, we will eventually get there because those are really good methods to know. But for now, I just want you to know that we're going to be spending all the time in Houdini. I'm going to actually use Houdini's Python shell itself rather than coding in the command terminal or an external editor, so that we're comfortable with how it works in Houdini. I want you to not sort of feel that you need some external thing and then you sit down maybe behind another machine that doesn't have PyCharm installed and then you don't know what to do. We're going to use Houdini itself. So we're going to use the Python shell, and I've actually created a little desktop for myself where I have two shells. I find this quite useful because sometimes you want to, type up a help thing over here, something like help, and then you're wanting to read through all of this information but also type lines. You want to maybe try and run this function. Now, how do you do it? So I just run it in here. So just having two Python shells open is very useful, and also the Python source editor. Okay, so it's just under Windows, Python source editor, and there's another Python shell. So if you ever want to pop open new ones, you can. All right. So these are the tools we're going to use. We're not going to use anything else for now. Over time, obviously, I'm going to show you how to do much more complicated things with Python and external editors that just help you code and do really cool things. But for now, we're going to start right at the beginning with just using Houdini itself. Okay. Right. Also, I just want to point out that if you were ever, once you've started developing your coding skills and you've built some tools that actually use Python, you should always have a Python shell open somewhere, even if it's just like here on the side, you've got your Python, your parameters. If we split this top bottom, turn this into a Python shell, there we are, and just put it really tiny. Okay, this is because anything that happens with your Python, we're gonna later on, we're gonna code these tools so that they error if something goes wrong, or they even give you reports about what they did. You click a tool and it seems like it just did one thing, but actually it went around in the background and did a whole bunch of things for you. But you don't know that unless it has a place to print it. Now, normally on Windows, if it doesn't have any Python shells open, it will print to the console, which is that little window that pops up when you open Houdini. But sometimes people close that console without realizing it. Also, I have had times where it's a little bit buggy. Once I've closed it and I don't have any Python shells open and I hit run a tool that should print, it doesn't print it to anywhere, and it doesn't pop open a new console. So just, if you have this open, then it will print here, which means you can always refer back to whatever has been printed in this shell, okay? But you cannot close it like this. See, even if it's compressed, but it's here, it exists, and there are no other Python shells open, right? So if we just went back to, let's say, a normal window, and I just split this top bottom, let's turn this into a Python shell, and then close this. If I had to run a tool now, it will not print to that Python shell. It might open a console and print to that, which, then it'll give us that information. But if it bugs out, which I have had before, then we've lost that information. There is no record of what just happened and what that tool is reporting back. So my handy advice to you, always have a Python shell, and you can compress it tiny. You don't need it massive, but if it's here, it will grab information, or you'll see stuff erroring. Especially when we have errors, we'll probably print it with a bunch of exclamation marks and then say, error, and it'll, tell us exactly why it's erroring. So when you run the tool, that's going to stand out to you, and then you'll expand this and have a look at what's going on. But if you don't have it, then you have nothing. Right. So this is just a little intro to the module so that you know how to get started. So maybe set up your Houdini, have 2 Python shells, or at least have your tiny little one at the bottom over here. And in the next lesson, we're going to get started right from the very beginning. And by the end of this module, everyone should be up to the same level and should be able to at least communicate with the software. All right. So I look forward to it, and I'll see you in the next lesson.